أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So I've been asked to tackle a question that's a very common question, and actually when there was a study done in the USA, Americans were asked if you could ask God one question and you knew that God would give you an answer, what would you ask? What would it be? And the most common question, of course, was, why is there pain and suffering in the world? But this comes from an atheist perspective, and what we're going to do is to think about why that perspective exists. We're going to challenge it, inshallah, and think about, academically and Islamically, why this doesn't necessarily apply to us. Now, there are two positions for theists. A theist is somebody, atheist is someone who does not believe in God. A theist is someone who does believe in God. So Christian philosophers, so Christian thinkers, belong to, firstly, they argue that the existence of evil does not disprove God's existence. So, in other words, they point out that the logical problem with arguing about the existence of evil itself is proof for atheism. And the second position is the one that says those who go beyond, but also try to understand God's wisdom in allowing evil to exist. So we have those two positions that come from the theists. Now, Islamically, the Islamic perspective, and what I'm going to try and do is to kind of thread this through the talk, inshallah. And I'll try not to talk for too long, otherwise Melik al-Maut's going to come get me. She's sitting there. She's all in black as well. She did it on purpose. So the Islamic perspective. Firstly, the problem of evil has always been present in human life, right? Right or wrong? Yes? Right or right? Everyone's very quiet today. Yes? Yes, alhamdulillah. But it's only really in recent times, since the Enlightenment, which is sort of a few hundred years ago, that it's been used to try and disprove God's existence, which is the world we've all been brought up in and we live in, by having the attitude to life changing in the West, basically. Now, the way we live, it's from a life that it's a purpose, like what's the purpose of life, to the quality of life. So we live now, don't we, for quality of life. It's all about, how good can our lives be? How much stuff can we have? How many can we make the most of life? And we've all heard the most recent thing, like living your best life, right? Okay, so this is the culture that we live in now, whereas previously it was people looking and thinking about the purpose of life itself. Now, according to the Sunnah, when we look at the Wahi, the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran, the revelation and the Sunnah has no difficulty seeing divine wisdom as kind of weaving the threads of pain and suffering into this amazing story. And this is the story that harmonizes mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and justice. And what this story does is it derives or takes happy endings from pain to build one's spiritual development. So this is very much from an Islamic perspective, that we don't see pain or evil in the world as something problematic from a religiosity perspective, from a spiritual perspective. So what about the link between good and evil? So any link between the existence of evil and the existence of Allah must never remain unchallenged. So if anyone ever says to you, and I'm sure all of us, especially those of us who've reverted to Islam, and maybe our non-Muslim families will say, oh, well, if there's a God, then why is there evil in the world, right? But we have to challenge that in a nice way, of course, because these are two separate issues that shouldn't be put together. Why would we put that together? Many people assume that because evil exists, God must either be unknowing or uncaring or incapable of removing that evil. But ultimately, the problem of evil and the conflation or the link between evil and the existence of God is a problem created for and by atheists. It's not something that you will see people of faith even considering, because the purpose of life is different for somebody who is a believer than for somebody who does not have a belief in the hereafter. So for believers in God, the existence of evil doesn't pose a problem at all. It doesn't make us despair as Muslims, as believers. Give you an example. When the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and if you think back to your seerah knowledge, when they are in the cave and they're running away, this is on the hijrah from Mecca to Medina, when they're running away and the Quraysh are literally outside the door of the cave, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is too scared. Of course you would be, right? It's a very normal thing. Any human being is going to be frightened. And what does the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam say to him? Do not grieve. La tahsan. Inna Allaha ma'ana. Don't be upset. Don't despair. Don't give up. Don't be sad, because indeed Allah is with us. Huh? And this is so key to our attitude towards good and evil. Yes, evil was outside that cave. They don't know that the Quraysh are not going to come in and get them and torture them and kill them, because they, believe me, they would have done if they'd have found them. But it's the attitude towards that. Regardless of the outcome, don't grieve, don't despair. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. So asking why evil exists reveals that we perceive, or people who question the existence of evil, means that they perceive evil as being something abnormal, something that's different, and that good is the prevalent normal. Okay, so you have two binary opposites. So therefore, before asking why is there evil, shouldn't rational people be asking questions like, why does good matter? And what is good? And why is there so much good? Why is it that we immediately go to the evil? So let's have another think now about the wisdom behind evil according to the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Both the Quran and the Hadith literature both confirm that there is hikmah, there's wisdom behind what may appear to us as al-insan, as human beings, to be evil. So the Sunni positionality on this involves reason that is guided by revelation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not reveal every wisdom. As al-insan, as human beings, we have limited knowledge from an Islamic perspective, right? We don't know everything, we don't have the capability of knowing everything. But if you're an atheist and there's no divine knowledge, then mankind should have the knowledge of everything, right? And this is why we rely so heavily on what we can see, not on what we cannot see. So as Muslims, we accept that we have limited knowledge, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills us to. So let's break this down to simple terms, because I can see some of you have got some notes, inshallah. So the first point is, number one, Allah is Al-Hakim. Allah is the most wise. Number two, because Allah is Al-Hakim, that necessitates wisdom behind everything that exists, whether it's good or evil or anything in between that. Third thing is, God's wisdom makes it necessary that some evil exists for very clear and profound reasons, whether we know it or we don't know it, or whether we see it and we choose to see it or we don't. Because again, we have to talk about our own positionality in this. How do I see something? Somebody passes away. How do I choose to see that? Do I see that as a disaster? I get sick. Do I see that as a disaster, or do I choose to see that as a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So there's an element of human choice in how we see good and evil as well. Now, Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, says that there is nothing, this he, and for anyone who doesn't know, he was just like the most amazing scholar. He was a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. And he said there is nothing in our existence that can be called pure evil, because every evil in this world is good from one angle or another. For example, if sickness harms the body from one angle, while from other angles it tests patience, it makes us more resilient, and it may even strengthen our immunity, right? We know that from medical science now, that there are two outcomes from sickness, whether it's long-term or short-term. Either it will make you stronger and more resilient physically and emotionally, or you will pass away from it and you'll return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the two binary outcomes. There are also evils committed by a will, by the will of our own. As human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us and the jinn a will of our own. Now, even the existence of the shaitan is not pure evil. Okay, that's a really weird thing to say sitting in a masjid, right? Firstly, because he was not created to misguide people. In fact, initially, we know that Iblis was worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was a servant of Allah, a very close servant of Allah, who then did something evil that caused his own downfall. And we look in the Quranic text, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, say, I seek refuge in the Lord of the daybreak, from the evil of that which he created. Yeah? So we know, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ. We know that this is in the Quranic verses. We see a binary opposite of good and evil. And we see that and recognize it in this dunya as well. Just moving on, because I know Malik al-Maut is going to jump at me in a moment. So let's have a think about the test of life, because life is a test. Now again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, in Surah Al-Mulk, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Right? He is the one who created the life and the death. Why? To test the ones of you who are the best in amala, deeds. All right? So we can see that, again, we have the binary opposites. We know what the purpose of life is. It's a test. We choose what we're going to do. Are we going to do the good, or we're going to do the evil? Now, if we have an explanation that Allah gives unconditional love, and we know certain denominations of Christianity, unconditional love, Jesus kind of died to forgive all the sins, so mankind is all totally cleansed if they're baptized or christened. But then we expect God to treat us as if there is no accountability for evil actions, which is problematic. So for those of us who've been brought up Christian, okay, we've been christened, so therefore we can do no evil, because all that evil that we do sits with the accountability of Isa salam, that God has forgiven us. So does that mean that we can go around and do whatever we want? Can we go around and commit whatever evil we want, knowing that Jesus, peace be upon him, has died for these sins, etc.? So even this, it's unrealistic, and it's an unrealistic perception. We have realistic expectations, and we have to be ready for the challenge of this dunya. Why? Because this dunya is brief. It's very short. We have people today who are not sitting with us because they've gone back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even very recently. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy and give the best to those people, and for us who will surely follow them. So why? Because we understand, and this is why we accept evil, because we understand that there is full justice in the dunya, in the akhirah, so in this life, in the next life, or both. And that ultimately we will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that every soul will taste death. And we test you with evil and with good as a trial or a test. And then to us you will all be returned. And that's where I'm going to conclude today, inshallah. So just to very quickly summarize, we've seen that there are binary opposites of good and evil. We've seen the different attitudes of atheists, of some denominations of Christianity, and how we should see good and evil as Muslims, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.